Yeah, good morning, all of you. It's going to be a pretty short session. So I have planned for 45 minutes of presentation and some 10-15 minutes of Q&A. So we should be done by 10:30. So that is basically the agenda for the day. It's fairly straightforward. It talks about a single point agenda. It is basically how to crack the IIFT, right? So I'll just give you a brief about what the test looks like, what are the good things, bad things about the test. Then we will get into an analysis of last year's test and last few years tests, so what has happened in terms of the IFT. And then I'll talk a bit about the test taking strategies, preparation strategies, and then we'll basically end the session. Right. So IFT is a very interesting institute. It's a very interesting test as well, honestly speaking, purely because on the good side, on the positive side, if you look at it, the test is extremely standard. So if you have looked at the past maybe 3-4 years of IFT papers, I think you will have a very good idea as to what the test looks like and what exactly you need to expect in terms of level of difficulty, let's say, or the question types that you're going to get, or the kind of competition that exists, right? So everything is more or less consistent. So again, I have been looking at IFT since 2019, 2009, sorry. So since then, I have been taking IFTs on and off. Some years I take it, some years, the last few years, I have not been taking the actual test. But again, I have seen the test, I have experienced, I have gone through students' experiences and all, and it has remained very consistent. So the last part of the session will basically deal with how to prepare for the test. The best way to prepare for the test is by looking at past year IFT papers, right? Because the soul has been very consistent. On the positive side, again, the test is very consistent. As I mentioned, you know what to expect when you go for the test. There are going to be minor surprises generally, but they are not going to be as major as what happens in terms of the CAT, right? So you don't really know what kind of passages might appear. You don't know the level of difficulty that might happen. This year, if you would have seen the scores that people have been getting, there has been at least one section in every slot that has been extremely difficult. So let's say, for example, verbal in slot 1 this year was very difficult. In slot 2, if you look at it, maybe LRDI was difficult. In slot 3, maybe if you look at it, then quant was supposedly difficult. But then again, people felt that LRDI was a bit more difficult. So that those kind of surprises are bound to happen, right? The kind of questions that you can see at the test, right? All those things are very variable when it comes to the CAT. But in terms of the IFT, even these surprising elements, you can sort of you can understand them, you can preempt them if you have seen the past few IFT papers, right? And that is basically what you need to do. On the downside, CAT gives you a lot of opportunities. So let's say, for example, you don't really do well on the day of the test, right? You might still end up getting a 95th, a 90th percentile, even an 85th percentile might get you into decent colleges. In IFT, it's basically either you get it or you don't get it, right? So it's that kind of a binary thing. The competition is less, yes, but then again, the seats are also fewer. So it's a very challenging test. I would personally like to prepare for the IFT, or I would like people to prepare for the IFT purely because it is very consistent, right? It does not throw up surprises like a ZAT or a snap, for example, right? Sometimes anything can happen at the snap, right? It's a very consistent test that exists. So that's why we are here. We have to plan ahead and try to crack the IFT. And I hope that's what the session will help you with, right? So, yeah. Okay, a lot of people want to prepare for IFT and SNAP simultaneously. So I'll try to cover it towards the end as to how do you balance the two things. It's not exactly rocket science, honestly, because the soul of ADMATS is slightly different compared to that of the CAT. But I'll focus on that a bit later, right? Yeah. So the agenda is fairly straightforward. We are going to talk about the exam pattern and cutoffs. So what was the exam pattern like last year, couple of years before that? So since 2019, it has remained more or less consistent since the time they became computer based, right? So exam pattern and cutoffs is what we are going to discuss from last year's test. Then exam strategy is something that we will focus on. So I have a couple of strategies that you can go for. I will try to share some insights in terms of these strategies as well, and basically what to do next. So now that you have roughly 2 weeks or exactly 2 weeks to go, 2 weeks and 21 minutes to go, how exactly to sort of prepare yourself, right? So that is basically what we will be covering. Now, in terms of the test, this year the notification that has come out, it basically talks about the amount of time that you will get to appear for the test. So we know that the test is going to be of 2 hours, right? 10 a.m. to 12 noon. That is basically the duration of the test. That much we know. The number of questions we don't know, but again, over the last few years, they have sort of looked at that particular split, and they seem to be happy with that particular split. So the number of questions have been 110. I won't be surprised if they keep it at 110 this year as well. So that should not be a surprising element, honestly. Right. So 110 questions is what we had. In terms of the sections, right? So there were 4 sections that were present. So if you look at the past IIFTs, I think around 2017, 2018, IIFT suddenly became a 6-section test. Before that, 2015, 2016, it was a 4-section test. So IIFT has this habit of changing things, but it was much easier for them to change it when it was a paper-based test, right? Because it was very easy for them to, printing paper doesn't take a lot of effort, right? But altering the number of sections, altering the number of questions in a section takes a lot of effort when it comes to a computer-based test, right? So that's why I believe they have been very consistent in terms of the computer-based tests. But you might want to be mentally prepared for a 6-section test as well. For now, we are assuming that it's a 4-section test worth 300 marks, right? So we will have 110 questions worth 300 marks. There are some questions that are worth 3 marks. There are some questions that are worth 1.5 marks. So the quant section, LRDI section, and VARC section had questions comprising of 3 marks each, and the general awareness section had questions comprising of 1.5 marks. Right. The negative marking is also similar. So for every incorrect answer, you get 1/3 negatives. So for a 3-pointer, you will get -1 for an incorrect answer. For a 1.5 pointer, you will get a -0.5 for an incorrect answer. So it's fairly straightforward what it looks like. Right. Now, there were 4 sections that were present in last year's test, and the year before that, and the year before that, and so on. The sections are verbal ability and reading comprehension. So roughly, you can say 16 questions from VA, 19 questions from RC. That kind of a split is what you will have. Quantitative aptitude, again, it's a single section. It always has been a single section. In terms of logical reasoning and data interpretation, again, last year it was a club section. So again, in the years that I mentioned earlier, 17, 18, the section was split into 2 smaller parts. But we are mentally prepared for that as well. But more or less, I think it's still going to be LR and DI clubbed together as one section. And the last section is general awareness, right? So the first thing you have to do when you enter the test lab and you're sitting in front of your screen, you have to read the instructions very carefully. Right, because there might be some clue in terms of the change in the number of questions, or the maybe the introduction of certain question types. Although we know that they are going to be MCQs, there is no mention of theta whatsoever. But then again, you might want to be mentally prepared for all kinds of eventualities. So read the instructions very carefully. Are there going to be sectional cutoffs? Some year they might mention that there is no sectional cutoff, right? Some year they might want to mention that if you score above 0 in a particular section, then that is basically going to be good enough for you to be considered in terms of your overall score, right? So read the instructions very carefully. IIFT has been known to throw some surprises in terms of the number of questions, the number of sections, the cutoffs that need to be achieved in each section, right? So make sure that you read the instructions very carefully, obviously, because you would have the time to do that. Okay. Now, in terms of the pattern and in terms of the number of questions that we had, as I mentioned, the reading comprehension and the verbal ability section is what we had in terms of last year's IIFT. So there were 105 marks worth of questions that were there. So as I mentioned, +3 -1, there were 35 questions from VA and RC, 16 RC, 19 VA. So that 16 RC has remained consistent over the last many years now. So 35 questions, 105 marks, right? The cutoffs that I have mentioned here are for general, EWS, and OBC candidates. The second column of cutoffs is SSP, so SC, ST, and PWD. It will also include KM candidates. The SSP cutoffs will also include KM candidates, right? So VA and RC, 105 marks worth of questions. Quantitative aptitude, 75 marks worth of questions. So 25 questions into 3 marks per question. LRDI 90. So again, you had a split of 30 into 3 and a split between LR and DI. So we'll cover it a bit later as to what exactly was this split like. And general awareness, 30 marks. So 1.5 marks per question means 20 questions, right? So you had 35 questions from VARC, 25 questions from Quant, 30 questions from LRDI. So 90 questions in total till here, and 20 questions from general awareness. Now, if you look at the cutoffs that I have mentioned here, these are the bare minimum cutoffs that you need to clear to be eligible for the next round, right? So there are sectional cutoffs. 11 is the number of marks. So these numbers that I have mentioned here are sectional cutoffs in terms of marks. So if you would have scored 11 marks in VARC, 8 marks in Quant, 14 in LRDI, 4.5 in general awareness, you would have been eligible to be considered to be given a call on the basis of your final score. So the final score is basically the important thing that you have, but there are sectional cutoffs as well, right? And again, as I mentioned, some years they might want to explicitly state that there are no sectional cutoffs. Many years, most of the years, almost every year, they will tell you that you are expected to exhibit competence in each of the sections. That is basically what they will tell you, and which basically means that you have to clear the sectional cutoffs. Now, 11 marks is nothing but 4 questions in VARC. 8 marks is nothing but 3 questions in QA. 14 marks is 5 questions in LRDI. 4.5 marks, if you look at it, is basically 3-4 questions in general awareness, right? So it's not a very difficult ask, honestly. So if you answer 4 to 5 questions correctly in each section, you should be able to clear the sectional cutoffs for sure. But the overall cutoff is something that you need to focus on well. Right. In terms of SC, ST, PWD, KM candidates, you will have 6, 10, 5, 3 as the sectional cutoffs respectively. But again, I would suggest that don't pay a lot of attention to sectional cutoffs. Most of you are going to clear the sectional cutoffs easily. General awareness, I will talk about it towards the end. But other sections, so definitely, I think you will be able to clear the cutoffs easily without any hassle whatsoever. Now, in terms of overall cutoffs, there you will see a different cutoff for general category. For EWS, NCOBC, there is one cutoff, and for SC, ST, PWD, KM, there is another cutoff. Now, this 42.6, 35.1, 27.6 is essentially a calculated score. This doesn't mean 42.6 out of 300. No, that's not what it means. 35.1, 27.6. No, that is not what it means, right? What it means is your score out of 100. Now, how do we get the score out of 100? That is where your split comes into the picture. So how do you get this 100, right? So 300 marks that you have, out of which whatever marks you will be scoring will be converted into marks out of 73. So let's say, for example, you end up scoring 100 out of 300, right? You scored 1/3 of the total marks. So out of 73, your score will be 24.33. Right? So 100 out of 300, 1/3 marks, 1/3 of 73, 24.33. That is the score that you are going to get from your IIFT. 10th score, let's say, for example, you get 8 points on the basis of your 10th score, 8 points on the basis of your 12th score. So you have 24.33 plus 8 plus 8, 40.33. If you come from a non-engineering background, you get 5 additional points. If you are a female candidate, you get 2 additional points. Right? So 40.33 is what you had. If you are an engineer male, you will stay at 40.33. If you are a non-engineer, 45.33. If you are a female candidate as well, 47.33, right? So this is basically how the scores are calculated. So now I'll go back to the previous slide. As I mentioned, 40.33 on the basis of 8, 8 and 100 marks out of 300, that would have taken you to 40.3. The whole idea, if you are a general category student, was to score above 42.6 marks. Right? So that was basically the cutoff. Okay. So this was basically the split that I mentioned. So 10 score 10 marks, 12 score 10 marks, 5 for non-engineers, 2 for females. That is the additional bit that you get. 73 will be your IIFT score. Now, in terms of the section-wise analysis, the first section that I'm going to talk about is data interpretation. So I'm speaking about it in terms of DI and LR separately, VA and RC separately. Right. So in terms of DI, when it comes to the IIFT, a lot of people are scared of DI. Right. So last year there were 16 questions when it came to the DI section. There were 3 marks per question, as I already mentioned. There is no calculator that is present at the IIFT. Right. And typically you are going to get line, table, bar, pie chart based sets. Now, DI is something that people are extremely scared of when it comes to the IIFT, because if you look at it at 2 fronts. One is basically where information has been given to you in a tabular format. Let's say you have been given a lot of numbers. And the second aspect is when the information has been given to you in the form of charts. Now, IIFT is notorious to throw these kind of questions at you, wherein you will have random numbers, 1735 and 1847. Let's say you have to find the ratio of 1735 upon 1847. Now, it's a difficult thing to calculate when you don't have a calculator. right? And sometimes the options might also be closed. I'll talk about the strategy in a bit, but these kind of questions might appear. In terms of the graphs as well, you might have a graph with a scale of, let's say, 10, 20, 30, 40, and there will be a point which will be between 10 and 20, slightly more towards 20. Now you don't know whether you want to take it as 15.5, 16, 16.5, 17, right? So it becomes slightly difficult for you to figure out what should be the exact number that should be taken, right? So there are these two aspects that make IIFT DI a bit more difficult. Now, the whole idea for you in this particular context is to figure out which one or two are the easier sets. So last year, if you look at the paper, I don't know how many of you have looked at the paper, but last year's test, if you have a look at, you will see that there were a couple of sets that were doable in nature, right? So there was a set based on multiple graphs. You could have gone ahead and done that set. You had a set on a table and a bar graph or a line graph. You would have been able to do that kind of a set. So a couple of sets were definitely doable. Two sets were moderate to difficult, you can see. But in years where IIFT has thrown extremely difficult DI sets, the sets have indeed been very difficult, right? So if you look at a 2015 IIFT, let's say, for example, or a 2018 IIFT, let's say, for example, 2017 IIFT, let's say, for example, the DI has been very difficult, right? 2018, I think there wasn't even one set that you would have cracked completely. And there was a sectional cutoff for DI that year, right? So sometimes IIFT DI becomes difficult. But then again, you can't assume and go that IIFT DI will be difficult. That is a very dangerous assumption to have, because if something like last year happens, then you might end up in trouble if you don't attempt those one or two DI sets that have been perceived to be on the easier side, right? So this is basically what you get in terms of DI. Now I will tell you a quick hack in terms of how to identify which sets to do, which sets to not do, right? When it comes to the IIFT, 8 times out of 10, you have to be mentally prepared for a set wherein there will be a lot of data. Lot of data in terms of numbers, lot of data in terms of graphs. There could be multiple graphs. There could be a large table with multiple values. All those things are possible in terms of the IIFT, right? And these are always going to be possible, right? You will be surprised if there is very less data on your screen. So IIFT will generally have a lot of data that will be present on your screen. That is one thing. Now, the way to go ahead and figure this out is, one, you have to look at the data that has been given to you in terms of numbers. Have these numbers good rounded off values? Are they in terms of integers or are they in terms of decimals? Are these values far apart or are these values close? So that is one thing you have to see. If these values are very closely stacked together, if the graph has points that are very closely mapped to each other and the scale is also very large, right? So if I've written 150, 200, 250, 300, let's say that is the scale on the y-axis that you have. And I have some point which is between 150 and 200, slightly towards 150. Round the midpoint slightly towards 150. What do I take it as? Do I take it as 170? Do I take it as 175? Do I take it as 165? What do I take it as? So as the scale becomes larger, right, the points will become very difficult to be predicted. So that is one thing that I would look at, the complexity of the data. If the data is nicely spread apart, even if it is random numbers, it's okay. But if it is spread apart, then I will be happier. If it is very closely clustered together, then I might not want to get it, right? So that is one thing purely in terms of data, the look and feel of the set. The second thing that I'm going to look at is the question, the actual question that you're going to get. So let's say in terms of DI, you have 4 sets, 4 questions each. In every set, I will try to look at the questions. What does the question ask you? Is the question asking you a simple growth rate in terms of one parameter? Or is it asking you to compare various parameters? If it is asking me to compare the various parameters, then sorry, I'm out of it. Because then I will have to calculate 1, I will have to calculate 2, I might have to calculate 3 and 4 as well, depending on the options. But if it is a straight question, what was the growth rate from 2010 to 2020? Brilliant. I will go ahead and I might be I might lean more towards these kind of questions, right? So again, you have to look at questions very particularly in terms of DI at least. The third thing I'm looking at is options. Now, if your options are far apart, your options are 5, 10, 15, 20, I would be more comfortable solving these kind of questions. If your options are 13.1, 13.4, 13.7, 13.9, then no, sorry, I'm more or less out of this. So any set that has complicated, close together data or very large axis that we have, right? Then I will probably go out of it. Questions, if they are single line questions, yes, I will go for them when I have to compare two things from one line or something. Options, if they are very closely fit together, I'll not go for it. Right? So scale, nature of questions, options. Three things are there. Only if these three things fall in place will I go ahead and solve it. If two of these three things are in place, one is not, second round. All three things bad, don't attempt that set. Right? So that is basically how you build a judgment. Try to apply this logic to past IIFT actual papers, right? And see what the analysts have to say. Once you see what the analysts have to say, and once your judgment matches that of the analysts, then you are good to, right? So that is basically what you need to keep in mind in terms of the DI section or DI part of it. Yeah, to score very good marks, we have to attempt these questions too. Not required, not necessary, Shreya. That is the beauty of the IIFT. So the freedom that IIFT gives you in terms of having very low sectional cutoffs and slightly higher overall cutoffs is the liberty to attempt the sections that you are actually strong at, right? So you have to do the bare minimum when it comes to DI-LR, and that should be good enough for you. Okay. Similarly, someone asked, if DI-LR is combined, will there be a separate cutoff for DI? No, Anshu. If DI-LR comes as a combined section, then it will have a sectional cutoff, as was the case last year. It will not have separate cutoffs. Okay. Ankita, how much a general category student should get to get a final call? As many as you can, right? There is no minimum number that I can think of. Depends on your 10th, 12th, gender diversity. Sab pe depend karta hai. But try to target at least 110-ish, 120-ish, because the score that you're going to get, the composite score, will be helpful to you in getting a convert as well. Right? So having a very good written score might actually mean that you have 1 foot inside the college. So make sure that you score as many as you can at the actual test, and you should not be under pressure to perform extremely well at the GDP. Okay, I'll talk about the time taken per section at a later point in time. Yeah, 25 in 10th, 12th, and other. Nidhi, again, as I mentioned, you can do your calculation, right? The cutoff was somewhere around 35, 37 marks. So 25 already there, 12 out of 73, 1/6 of the total marks. Decent enough. So 50, 60 should be good enough, but no harm in trying for a higher score. Okay. We'll go to the next section, and please listen the entire segment carefully before you come up with your questions, because a lot of your questions would be answered when I'm speaking. So if you don't pay attention to what I'm saying and type your question, then you might miss out on your answer, right? So the next part that I'm going to look at is logical reasoning. As I mentioned earlier, last 2 years, DI and LR have been clubbed together to form one section, but I have kept it differently because the look and feel of the two parts is different. Right? In terms of LR, the number of questions last year that appeared was 14, so 16 DI, 14 LR. Last year, the subjective take is that LR was slightly more difficult compared to DI. Generally, LR is slightly easier compared to DI, but last year, LR was slightly more difficult compared to DI. But DI had two easy sets, right? So more or less, it made up for the sectional score. The cutoff was more or less similar to what it was like in 2020, right? So that was basically the minor difference that existed. In terms of LR, there will be a lot of question types that will be there, right? So unlike a CAT, wherein you have 4 questions or 5 questions per set, here you will not have that kind of a thing. In this case, you might actually have one question that is based on coding, decoding logic. You might have one question that is a puzzle, a standalone puzzle that exists. You might have one question or one set that is based on sequential output. You might have one question that is based on a series-based concept, right? You might have a set that is based on arrangements. You might have a set that is based on puzzles. You might have a set that is based on, say, a Venn diagram kind of a thing, right? You can have any kind of a set that might exist, right? So you have to be good at a lot of small things. They are not very difficult concepts to become better at, but there are a lot of things that can exist, right? And that is basically where you can get some minor surprises. But people who have prepared or who are mentally prepared for ADMATs, who have gone through their 5th module, who have a fair understanding of what I'm saying right now, you should not get surprised on the day of the test, right? So that will generally not happen. So don't worry about it. You can also have sets on circular arrangement, tournament, scheduling. So these kind of sets might also occur when you have to arrange things in the form of, say, timelines. You have to arrange things in terms of priority, ranking-based sets. So these kind of sets might appear. Right. Now, last year, if you look at it, it was slightly more difficult in 2021 compared to DI. So DI had 2 easy sets and it had 2 moderate sets. One of them was difficult, one was still moderate. In terms of LR, almost all the sets were of moderate level of difficulty. Only the standalone questions that you had in terms of say coding, decoding, or a couple of puzzles that were there, those were to be perceived to be on the easier side. So out of 14 questions, 4 questions were perceived to be on the easier side. In terms of DI, roughly 7 to 8 questions were perceived to be on the easier side. Right? So that is basically what logical reasoning looks like. It's like any other logical reasoning section that you would have attempted. Maybe the NMAT, let's say, for example, if you would have taken the test, or if you are preparing for the SNAP, something similar to that, slightly higher level of difficulty. Right? So that is basically what we are going for. But again, the best way to prepare for the logical reasoning section, just pull out the past few year IIFT papers, look at the logical reasoning section there, and you should be mentally prepared to expect whatever the IIFT might throw at. All right. We'll go to the third section. This is the GK section that you have, general awareness. A lot of people are scared of this particular section, right? I'll talk about how to address these things later. So total number of questions, 20. Marks per question, 1.5, minus 0.5 for an incorrect answer. Last year, there were fewer questions on static GK and 15 questions on current affairs out of 20. So a lot was based on current affairs last year, right? The year before that, there was a split of 9-11, I remember. 9 static, 11 current affairs, or 10-10 kind of thing, right? So it's generally 50-50. Last year, they spent a lot more energy on current affairs. So good for people who read regularly, bad for people who will sort of try to brush up on things in the last few days, right? So the questions are fairly straightforward. The questions are not very difficult to understand or to answer, honestly speaking. If you have a basic fundamental knowledge of what exactly is going on around you, you should be fine. Okay, I'll talk about how to cover the GK part over the next couple of weeks. But more or less, if you are a decently well-read person, you know your business GK in terms of say logos, in terms of say heads of state, in terms of countries, in terms of rivers, in terms of capitals, stock indices, currencies, you should be fine. So these are basically the things that we are talking about in terms of the GK section. And if you have a working knowledge of these things, you should be able to do very well. So for a decently prepared candidate, answering roughly 7 to 8 questions is not going to be difficult at all. And as we saw, the cutoff was 4.5, meaning effectively 3 questions. If you answer 3 questions correctly, sorted, right? The number of questions that you have there, that is the number of questions you will be able to attempt in your first round, will give you some indication. Now, I would like to talk about a controversial strategy here that some people might want to follow. So in terms of the GK section, one thing you can do is you can go all out, right? So as I mentioned, 3 questions out of 20 is the cutoff. For every incorrect answer, you get 1/3 negative marks, right? Now you can think about this mathematically. Let's say, for example, in your first round, you managed to answer 5 questions and you are extremely confident of those 5 questions. You are certain that you have got those 5 questions right. And that there is a high possibility that this might actually happen, right? Now, 5 questions, you are sure that these are going to be right. Your judgment of the cutoff is that 3 absolute corrects will be beneficial for you or will be good enough for you to clear the sectional cutoff. What you can do is you can go all out in the remaining few questions as well. So now you have a buffer of 2 correct answers, right? Buffer of 2 correct answers. There are some questions where you are 50-50. You may or may not, you have definitely eliminated 2 options, but out of the remaining 2 options, you don't know whether you will be right or not. But because you have 2 surplus questions under your belt, you can afford to get 6 incorrect answers. Even if you get 6 incorrect answers, you are still going to be at absolute 3 questions, right? But because it's a 50-50 chance that you are playing against, out of 6, even if you get 1 question right, you are gaining or you are clearing the cutoff for sure. Out of 6, if you are getting maybe 3 correct, 3 wrong, you have done much better than what you would have done otherwise. And in a test like an IIFT, wherein every mark is going to be crucial, right? So out of 300, whatever you get is going to be scaled down out of 73, right? So every mark that you get here is worth slightly less than 0.25 marks is what we are trying to say here, right? So 0.23, 0.24 marks is like gold dust if you gain marks, right? So that is basically what you can go for. Maybe try it out in a few tests. Go to the first round for GK, mark whatever answers you can. Whatever is about 3 that you have marked, right? You can afford to get 3x of those questions wrong. Now, I'm not saying that mark it even if you're not sure. 50-50 chances you can take, right? What I do during the test generally is I attempt everything in combat. Even if I don't know something, I'll attempt it because probability-wise, it makes sense for you to attempt it. Once you have crossed that threshold, and crossing that threshold is generally not very difficult. Okay, so that is basically what we are looking at. Sanjay, strategy is very straightforward. Typically 3 to 4 absolute right answers should be good enough for you to get into IFT, or should be good enough for you to clear the GK sectional cutoff. Now, let's say, for example, you attempted 6 questions. You believe 4 is going to be the cutoff. 4 absolute questions is going to be the cutoff. You have a surplus of 2 questions. For every correct answer that you have given, you can afford to get 3 incorrect answers, and you will still clear the cutoff. So for 2 surplus questions, you can afford to get 6 questions wrong, and you will still be able to clear the section. Right? So you might want to take more risks when it comes to the GK section. So again, I have a very important thing that I want to tell you about. IFT compendium, the IFT tests that we have in the GK zone section, they will have a lot of questions. Now, a lot of people think that the questions will be exactly picked from there and will ask at the IFT. No, that doesn't happen, and it shouldn't happen, right? Because if you look at the questions that we have last year, I think around 5 questions were directly lifted from, or were exactly the same as what was present in your compendium. Now, that's a big number, honestly speaking. Out of 25 questions are the exact same that you have seen earlier. It's a huge number. But people get disappointed that only 5 questions came from the compendium. Now, the way to read the compendium, understand the compendium, is that one question is not exactly one question. One question is worth 4 questions. Why is that the case? Every question will have 1 correct answer and 3 incorrect answers. But those 3 incorrect answers are also relevant. They are not random names that have been put. Right. So it's not as if they are talking about something entirely random in the remaining 3 options. If that would have been the case, it would have been very easy for you to answer the question. But because the 4 options are relevant, that is basically why you might end up getting confused. So what is the currency of Bulgaria? Let's say, for example, someone asks you, and there are 4 currencies that have been given to you. There is a baht that has been written. There is a kronor that has been written somewhere. There is a pound that has been written somewhere. There is an euro that has been written somewhere, right? So although your answer might be one of these 4, the other 3 are not the correct answers. And that will help you understand 3 more questions, right? So look at GK in that perspective, and then I think you should be fine. Okay. So compendium is good enough. Compendium is basically the best resource you can get, especially for the last couple of weeks, because you don't really have time to go through all the news items that are there. And it is mostly impossible for you to remember everything that you would have. Right. The second strategy that I want to talk about in terms of GK is passive reading will also help you. Right. It's not necessary for you to sit and mug up each and every fact and try to recall everything. The point is you have to read as much as you can over the next couple of weeks. Read as many things as you can from the GK compendium. Right. If you finish the GK compendium once, read it again. Chances are very high that there will be top of mind recall. So if you know that the headquarters of some organization is present in Geneva, and you get an option which says Geneva, Paris, Washington, DC, and whatever, Athens, let's say, for example, right? Top of the mind, you will know that Geneva is possibly the right answer, right? And that is basically the 50-50 chance that I'm talking about. So even if you read it passively, make sure that you cover a lot of ground. Don't stand back and try to memorize each and every headquarter. That is not going to happen. Nobody remembers each and every headquarter of each and every prominent organization that exists, right? So don't sit and try to memorize everything that you read. Read it casually, read it passively, but read a lot. If you finish it once, revise it again, and you should be fine. Okay. So that is something that works. All right. We'll go to the next section, reading comprehension. So reading comprehension has traditionally been perceived to be difficult when it comes to the IFT. The total number of questions last year were 16. So there were 2 sets with 2 passages with 3 questions each, and 2 more passages with 5 questions each. Traditionally, IFT has had passages with 4 questions each, right? But last year they had 2 passages of 3 questions, 2 passages with 5 questions each. Now the problematic area here is +3 -1, that is fine. The problematic area is this one. Right. So for the 3 question passages, the length was 600 to 700 words. And that is the typical length that you saw at the CAT. So whatever passages you saw at the CAT were roughly 600 to 700-ish words. Right. At the IFT, 600 to 700 words passages will give you 3 mark worth of questions. And the 5 mark worth of questions, or the 5 questions passages, will essentially have 900 to 1000 words. So they will be huge. Right. That is basically what you have to be on the lookout for. And 2 passages 600 to 700, 2 passages 900 to 1000 was basically what was the case last year. Now, the bad thing is the passages will generally be lengthier and there will be a lot of data that will be present. But the good thing is you will not have to remember or memorize anything. So if I ask you what passages appeared at the CAT, and if you would have taken it seriously, you can tell me what all passages appeared in your slot. So in my slot, there was a passage on undead. There was a passage on stoicism. There was a passage on Marx's critical theory of technology, let's say, for example. There was a passage on Chinese the Oriental perception of imitation, right? So these kind of passages existed. And if I say these names, and if you are taken it in the first slot, you will be able to recollect the passages that I'm talking about. But at the IIFT, you ask anyone who has taken IIFT, they will not be able to tell you what the name or the title of the passage was, right? Because people don't sit and read those passages, and you don't have to. Generally, because the passages will have questions that are mostly factual in nature or are extremely territorial or local in nature, right? They are not global passages. They are not global questions wherein the questions cover the entirety of the passage. No, the questions will be very specific in nature. So let's say, for example, if they are talking about 3 factors of some theory, one question will focus on only one factor. It will not talk about the difference between 2 factors. It will talk about the nature of one factor, right? So that is basically what happens in terms of the reading comprehension passages. Typically, a good strategy might be for you to read the passage very quickly. Don't read each and every word. Read the passage very quickly. Try to figure out what all are the key phrases, key nouns that are present, right? People's names, places, events, years. These are the things that you can focus on once you read it quickly. Then go to the questions and then go back to the passage. So this is something that might work better in terms of an IIFT passage. CAT may, it will not work for sure because you have to comprehend the passages. They are dense in nature. In terms of IIFT, even if the passage is dense, the questions are bound to be on the easier side, right? So don't worry depending on the length of the passage. Look at the questions. If the questions are factual, single point questions, then go for it, right? If the question asks you which of the following is or are true in the context of the passage, followed by 4 statements, and the options are combination of 1 and 2, 1, 3, 4, 2 and 4, none of these, then better to not get into that question at the beginning. Okay. Single question is there. According to Marx's critical theory of technology, which of the following is true? 4 things. Just verify those 4 things from the part that is relevant to you, and you should be sorted. Okay. So don't judge the passages on the basis of their length or the content that they have. Judge the passage on the basis of the questions that have been asked. All right. In terms of verbal ability is a fairly straightforward part. It is not as unverbal ability as happened at the CAT. You have proper verbal ability questions when it comes to this particular section. So there were 19 questions last year, plus 3 minus 1. The questions are from a variety of topics. So you might see a question on antonyms, you might see a question on origin of words, you might see a question on foreign phrases, right? So something like a coup de grace. So you have to figure out what is the meaning. So it's not exactly an English phrase, right? In terms of idioms, flogging a dead horse. So what does it translate into? Grammar based questions, wherein you will have to be good in terms of parallelism, spotting errors based on parallelism, subject verb agreement, let's say, pronoun antecedent, let's say, for example, dangling modifiers, tensors, all those kind of things, articles, right? So these things you might have to focus on in terms of grammar. If you have gone through the 4 modules that were there, I think you should be fine in terms of grammar, right? Because the questions are not very difficult. Even if you read it casually, you should be able to understand that something is off, right? So it is that straightforward that you're going to do. So there are no very difficult errors that you need to spot. The questions are fairly straightforward in terms of grammar, right? For foreign phrases, idioms, again, you can just read it casually. If you go through the IIFT mocks that we have on the portal, they will have questions that will be based on, that will have some questions on idioms, phrases and all. You can just explore phrases similar to those and you should be fine. Okay? But if you have been a decent reader, if you have read even casually, you should be able to make sense of a lot of these phrases that you might come across. Right now, in terms of verbal ability, there is no real strategy. The only strategy is to not panic, right? Because it's very easy for you to look at a new question type and feel that there is something new that is happening here, right? So there might be a crossword that might pop up, and you will be like, I have never really solved a crossword in my life. Whenever I see a crossword in a newspaper, my instinct is to turn that page. right? So how will I do it during the test? So don't be scared of it. It is not going to be your typical crossword wherein there are only clues given to you, right? This crossword will have words that you might already know of, right? So those kind of things will be there. Don't get worried just because you see a question type that you have not seen earlier. Even if it's a crossword, it's fine. Even if it is a grid-based scrambled word, it's fine. You should be able to manage it. The words are generally not going to be very difficult. Okay, so quantitative ability section, last year there were 25 questions. Now the section was perceived to be slightly on the moderate to difficult side, purely because there were 8 easy questions, 7 medium questions. But that effectively means that there were 10 difficult questions, right? So there were more difficult questions compared to easy or moderate medium questions. So that is basically what made this section slightly difficult. Now again, plus 3 marks. So you are essentially looking at split between arithmetic, numbers, algebra, geometry, modern math. So last year we had some 8 questions from modern math, 6 from geometry, 3 from algebra, 7 from arithmetic, 1 from numbers. So that is basically what it looked like in terms of number of questions. So 25, 30, 35, 35 VARC, 30 LRDI, 25 quant. This is basically the split that we have. Now in terms of quant, the arithmetic questions are generally on the easier side. Extremely manageable questions, right? Some of them will be very long to read, 4, 5 statements long. You might want to treat these questions with a bit of caution, right? Don't go ahead and leave those questions because they are long in nature. Just try to read what the question is trying to ask. If there is a coherent story wherein every statement you are going ahead step by step by step, then you can go ahead and do it. But if it's a garbled story, meaning there are 2 people, let's say, one person has X, one person has Y. Then next statement, one person reduces whatever by X, gives it to the other person. Now there is an intersection that is happening. These kind of questions might be slightly dangerous. But if they're following 2 different paths, or if there is only one path that is being followed, you can go ahead and attempt those kind of questions as well, right? In terms of geometry, typically the split is 50-50. Some questions will be on the easy to moderate side, but you can find around 3 or 2 questions at least which were difficult last year, right? Similarly, in terms of modern math as well. So in terms of progression based questions, they are generally on the easier side. But if it comes to summation, those kind of things, let's say, for example, or if it comes to complicated probability based questions where there are a lot of things that are happening simultaneously, those are the questions that you might want to avoid if you are not good at those things. Yeah. So this is basically what the split looks like in terms of quant. One word of caution: what should you prepare? Be prepared in terms of formulas. So at a CAT, let's say, for example, you will be able to work out the answer to a question even if you don't know the formula. So let's say, for example, 2 people are traveling towards each other. They cross each other. One takes 9 minutes to reach this end. The other takes 16 minutes to reach this end. Speed of one person is 30. What is the speed of the other person? Very easy question to answer, right? Even if you don't know the formula, you can just equate the 2 ratios and figure out. At the IIFT, there will be 3 to 4 questions, almost assured, you can be assured of this particular fact, at least 3 to 4 questions wherein either you know the formula and you get the answer, or you don't know the formula, you won't get the answer. Something along the lines of knowing the cosine rule, let's say. So if you know that in a triangle with sides A, B, C and angles capital A, capital B, capital C, right? Cos of A is given by B square plus C square minus A square by 2BC. If you know this fact, then you will be able to solve it. Naito, you will not be able to solve it at all. Something similar to this in terms of, let's say there is a point with coordinates xy, and there is a line with equation ax1 plus b, ax plus by plus c is the equation of the line. X1, y1 are the coordinates. What is the distance between the point and the line? If you don't know the formula, you will not be able to find out the distance. Okay. So these kind of questions appear very frequently at the IIFT. So make sure that you revise all your formulas. I'm not saying learn new formulas, but revise whatever has been there in your module. So all these things that I spoke about would be there in your modules in some capacity, right? So make sure that you revise these formulas, especially in terms of coordinate geometry and trigonometry, and you should be fine. Okay. In terms of level of difficulty compared to the CAT, you can say it is more or less similar to what happens at the CAT. So more or less in terms of level of difficulty, it is similar to that of the CAT, but because of the strategy aspect, you might not want to be scared of IIFT quant as much as you were scared of CAT quant. Okay. Now we'll quickly have a look at a couple of strategies that that I will talk about, and then maybe you can use these strategies at actual mocks and figure out which one works best for you, right? So this is basically something that I follow personally. I follow this strategy. This strategy is essentially something wherein I will keep the easier things or the things that I like for the end. Okay, so you will get done with the difficult things first, do put in the hard yards first, and then go for the easier things towards the end. Why does this work for me? Purely because, see, one thing is I don't really have a bad section, honestly speaking, right? So if you don't really have a bad section, this might actually work for you. And the second thing is, let's say, for example, I get stuck in data interpretation or I get stuck in reading comprehension, right? Now, what I can do is I can maybe remove 5 minutes from quantitative ability. It's okay for me to attempt quantitative ability in 20 minutes as well, right? Because I'm good at quantitative ability. Okay. So because I'm confident of doing well at QA, even if I have 20 minutes, I can afford to do it towards the end. But let's say, for example, I take QA at the beginning, I get so engrossed in solving QA that I spend 30 minutes instead of 25. I will have to cut 5 minutes from one of the difficult sections. I will have to cut 5 minutes from reading comprehension. And if in that your reading comprehension is easy, those 5 minutes might lead to disaster. Okay, so that is the overall gist of the strategy. I'll just run through the strategy once and the logic behind doing this. So GK, I keep it right at the beginning purely because, again, this is not scientifically founded. This is essentially an idiosyncrasy that I have. So GK, I will spend 10 minutes at the beginning purely because I think I'll forget GK once the test starts. Okay, so whatever I remember, I have to put it on my sheet, or I want to put it at the test, and then I don't have to remember those things that I have studied over the last couple of weeks, right? So that's why I take GK at the beginning. Not really scientific, honestly speaking, but yeah, that has helped me. Verbal ability after that, purely because it's a very quick section to run through. Standalone questions, very short questions. Mostly the questions are either you know it or you don't, that kind of thing, right? So if you have never heard a term, let's say you get a term called Schadenfreude, and Schadenfreude is something that you have never heard of. How will you answer the question, right? So verbal ability is extremely binary in nature. That's why I go through it quickly, 15 minutes, finish off whatever you can. Then reading comprehension, because now I have got into the flow. Now it makes sense for me to continue with verbal, but go slightly deeper. So then I will go for reading comprehension passages, 20 minutes, whatever I can, easier passages, I will go through. So maybe a couple of passages or 2.5-ish passages is what I aim to attempt in 20 minutes. Okay. So I have made sure that I have done justice to the VARC section, which is sort of my weakest section, so to say. Yeah. So that is what I have done till now. Then I go to the next difficult part, which is data interpretation. Because traditionally, DI has been difficult when it comes to the IIFT. I will try to gauge the level of difficulty of the 4 sets that I mentioned on those 3 parameters that I had mentioned, right? One is basically the density of the data that exists. The second thing is the nature of questions that have been asked. And the third thing is the options that I have. So depending on these 3 parameters, I will figure out which sets do I need to focus on. 10 to 15 minutes, 1.5 to 2 sets is decent enough, and then move on. So if you look at DI and LR together, I have accounted for 30 minutes. Okay. So if I take 10 minutes in DI, I know that DI is difficult. I need 20 minutes to focus on LR. If I believe that DI is easier, I will spend 15 minutes on DI and then I have 15 minutes for LR, which I am perceiving is difficult. Okay. So this is basically what the DI LR chunk looks like, 30 minutes. Now LR is something that I'm extremely fond of. I love cracking puzzles. So I have kept 15 to 20 minutes for LR, and now I have come to the end of basically the first round at least. Okay. Same thing, quantitative ability. I believe that I am very strong at quant. So then I have kept it for the end. Right. So 25 minutes I have kept for quant. So now essentially after you have gone through the entire thing, 10 minutes GK, 15 minutes VA, 25 minutes plus 20, 45 minutes, you are done with GK and VA, 45 minutes. Next 30 minutes, you are done with LRDI. So 75 minutes. After that, 25 minutes quantitative ability, 100 minutes done. Now you have 20 more minutes to go, and that is your buffer. So you have gone through all the sections now. If you think that you can squeeze in another reading comprehension or another couple of reading comprehension passages, you can invest these 20 minutes in those RC passages. Because by now you have a relative standing between, say, RC and DI. And that is basically the choice that you have to make. Do you want to solve RC or DI. So 2 RC passages or 2 DI sets or 1 RC passage, 1 DI set. So that is a call that you need to take over the last 20 minutes. If both of them have been difficult, then maybe you might want to focus on the easier sections and try to put in some more attempts there. Okay? So these 20 minutes will be the buffer. Now, this is a strategy that I have religiously followed ever since I have taken the IIFT. Right? So earlier we had to fill in the OMR sheets. So this 100 minutes barrier was basically when I used to start filling my OMR sheet. So I did not fill my OMR sheet till the time I had finished one round. Okay? And that is when I started filling the OMR sheet. I was left with another 15 minutes and then I put in the extra attempts that I needed to put to go beyond the cutoff. Right? So that is basically the first strategy that I have mentioned here. So the good thing here is you can choose the order of sections. So there is no compulsion in terms of which section should you go for first and which section should you go for later. There is no compulsion in terms of how much time should you be spending per section. So you can spend as much time as you want on whichever section you want. But the overall idea is for you to have a balanced score because you never know which section might be easy, right? So that's why this kind of a strategy is advised. There is another strategy that you can maybe think about. Again, this is a strategy that is completely based on round 1 and round 2. Now, I have kept the order of the sections same, but you can change the order of the sections in this strategy, right? So GK, 5 minutes, do whatever you are only confident about. So you have to do only those questions that you are confident about. Verbal ability, 15 minutes, answer only those questions that you are 100% certain about. RCs, 2 RCs, 15 to 17 minutes. DI, only one set. Don't get into the second set at all. 8 to 10 minutes. Logical reasoning, 2 sets or maybe 6 to 7 questions. Try to do it in 15 minutes. Quant, again, this is basically where it changes, right? Quant, 15 minutes is what you have. Dig out those 5 questions, get those 5 questions right, and be sorted. So the idea of the first round is for you to get a bare minimum score, right? So at the GK, let's say, for example, you get some 6 marks, let's say. Verbal ability, let's say, for example, you answer some 6, 7 questions correctly, 8 questions correctly, you get some 24 marks. So you are at 30 now. 2 RC passages. Let's say you get some 5 questions right, some 2, 3 questions wrong, it's perfectly. Okay? Another 15 marks is what you have. So 40, 45, which is where you're sitting at. DIMA, 1 set you have done. Again, 3 correct, 1 wrong, some 7, 8 marks. So 50, 55 marks you're sitting at. LR, 2 sets, generally you are going to get some 18 odd marks. So you are sitting at some 60, 65-ish marks. Quantitative ability, another 15 marks. So you are now sitting at a total of 75 to 80 marks at the end of round 1, which is decent enough for you to get a call if you have had good academic performance throughout, or and if you are a female candidate, if you're a non-engineer. Utna is enough. Now you have 45 minutes to boost your score. So the first part is just building that base from where you can launch your second round. Okay? So round 1 will basically involve roughly 15 minutes per section except maybe DI, or 15 minutes per part except DI, and round 2 will essentially involve 45 minutes of doing whatever you felt was easy and whatever you're comfortable. Okay? So that is basically the second strategy that you have. All right. So in terms of overall strategy, it's a game of 2 halves, as I mentioned, right? First half, you have to clear sectional cutoff. So that was the second strategy that I spoke about. The second half is you have to maximize your overall score. And for those of you who are not very good at clicking and finding out and switching on and off, there is a view question paper option as well. So I hope this year also they have that option. So it's somewhere at the top, you'll be able to see. There's a view question paper option wherein you will be able to click on it and view the entire question paper, scroll through that entire question paper and try to see what all questions are there. So if you see a lot of geometry diagrams, you know that it's a geometry heavy test, like it was the case last year. Right? If there are a lot of long arithmetic based questions, you are mentally prepared to deal with those questions. So you can use the question paper option to avoid scrolling. Now, in terms of exam strategy, 1, be prepared, mentally prepared for long RC passages, higher order QA, as I mentioned, and insanely tough DI sets. That is something you have to be mentally prepared for. You can't be surprised when you go to the test and see an RC passage. This means you are required to scroll once, twice, and another half times, right? So 2.5 scroll passages are a reality when it comes to the IIFT. So you will have huge passages. That is something that you have to be mentally prepared for. Tough DI sets in terms of the complexity that is required to calculate things, not in terms of understanding the set. You'll be able to understand it very easily, but calculating it is going to be difficult. So you have to be mentally prepared for these kind of eventualities, right? Second thing is, don't be scared of general awareness. Everyone out there is. So if I ask you guys now, who do you think, or do you think that you will be able to clear or sail through the general awareness section? I don't think I'll be able to see a lot of responses, right? Positive responses. People who are genuinely, people who genuinely believe they will be able to crack the GA section. Purely because GA is infinite, right? You can ask anything in the GA section, and you can't be prepared for answering any question that you might come across, right? So that's why everybody is going to be scared of general awareness. Even I'm scared of general awareness, right? But then again, you have to understand that everybody is scared. You are scared. You know that everybody else is scared. You know that everybody else is going to make those mistakes. You know that everybody else is going to be conservative. And when you are conservative, there is a chance that you might slip. So you have attempted only 4 questions. Let's say you get one wrong. You have missed the cutoff, right? So then it's a very dangerous game that you are playing. Now you know that people are going to play those kind of games. People are going to lose out. That is something that you know. Now, once you have knowledge of this particular thing, you have to capitalize on that. The more fearless you are in terms of GA, the better off you will be. And you can try it out in a few mocks. Be fearless, be absolutely fearless, attempt everything that you get in that. Even if you don't know something, attempt. But be logical in terms of what you are guessing, right? If a name sounds Indian, don't go ahead and mark French as the answer, right? So that kind of a thing. I have some filter in your head. Attempt the questions. Take intelligent guesses and see where it leads you. I am sure you'll become more confident if you do these kind of things. Okay. Again, in these kind of tests, you have to understand when you are at your most alert and when you are not. Meaning, let's say, for example, between 20 to 35 minutes is when you make the most mistakes, because that is basically when you are slightly more complacent. As soon as 30-40 minutes pass, you become more alert, right? So you have to understand where is that point wherein your energy starts to dip, right? And that is basically the point wherein you have to become more alert. Try to get in a section there which you are very good at, wherein you will not feel bored, right? Instead of getting to a section wherein you actually get bored. So if 20 to 40 minutes is the time period when you are at your worst in terms of concentration, don't put your most difficult section there, because then it's going to mess up your entire test taking strategy, right? So this is basically where your self-awareness will come into the picture. Last bit, do not overshoot your time limits at any cost. If you have allotted 15 minutes for DI, 15 minutes for DI, it is in the first round. Even if all 4 sets are easy, don't change your strategy during the test. Even if all 4 sets are difficult, don't change your strategy and make sure that you are putting in 15 minutes, right? Make sure that if all the sets are difficult, move on. That is the best thing that you will want to do, because you will be under a lot of pressure when you're attempting the last section and you don't want to do that. Okay, so make sure that you do not overshoot your time limits. It's okay for you to end the section before the allotted time limit, but don't overshoot it at all. So all 4 sets are difficult, or all passages are lengthy and extremely inferential. Then what you can do is you can maybe take 5 minutes or 10 minutes instead of 20. That is perfectly okay. But don't get stuck at any point in time. You get stuck once or twice, you have already lost the battle. Okay, so don't get stuck on a question. You can solve these questions after the test is done. That is fine, but don't try to solve all the questions during the test. In terms of study plan, fairly straightforward. You have 5 mocks on your portal, and I think last couple of years IIFT papers are there in terms of the test taking, in terms of in the form of tests. So take those, analyze and consolidate your strategy. You can maybe try out a strategy for 2 to 3 mocks and finalize one of these 2 strategies that are discussed. So that much is good enough. Generally, you will not learn a lot of new things from the mocks. So CAT, if you look at the CAT mocks, you learned something with each passing mock. So you had to analyze it a lot. You had to sort of deep dive into it and understand how that particular set was cracked, right? But in terms of IIFT, it's essentially you have to see the ball, hit the ball. So see ball, hit ball kind of a strategy works here, right? You might want to go through the questions that you were not able to attempt purely to see if your decision making was right or not, right? But your IIFT mocks will help you to make better decisions in terms of the test. They are not there to build content. So compared to the 40 CAT mocks that you had, you have 5 mocks for IIFT. Okay. The second thing that you have to do is basically focus on past IIFT papers. So as I mentioned at the very beginning of the session, IIFT as a test has a soul, right? And if you have gone through the past many IIFT years papers, past many years IIFT papers, you will be absolutely certain of what to expect from the test. So IIFT, I generally say it has been a 40%, 50% kind of a test, right? An easier IIFT will be a 50% IIFT, wherein 50% of the marks will be achievable, will be good enough. And a difficult IIFT is basically something when 35 to 40% of the marks is going to be good enough. And that is where 105 to 120 comes into the picture and 150 comes into the picture. Okay. So IIFT has generally followed this binary approach. Easier IIFTs, 50% should ideally be your target. Difficult IIFTs, 40% should be your target. And I'm talking about a higher target, right? So that is basically what I'm talking about. Solve as many past IIFT papers as you can. Once you have figured out a test taking strategy, there is no need to solve these in the form of tests. Try to work on your judgment. Try to see which questions you perceived as difficult and the analyst. So you can just search for past year IIFT analysis by IMS. You will be able to get the past year IIFT analysis. Just have a look at the analysis. First, to form a judgment of your own, then look at the actual analysis and try to compare them. Okay. The day your analysis matches that of the analyst is the day when you have figured out how to prioritize when it comes to the test. Okay. GK zone I already mentioned. IIFT compendium, IIFT test, two things are there. Make sure that you go through everything. Compendium will mostly have current affairs, might have a bit of static GK as well, but your IIFT tests will have a lot of static. So make sure that you have gone through these static GK documents, the other documents that you have in terms of GK. Make sure you have gone through the GK zone bit entirely. That will help you crack the IIFT GK easily. Okay. And go through the ADMAT workshops, as I mentioned earlier, Module 5 ADMAT workshops, just to make sure that you are tuned in terms of the new question types that might happen. So past year IIFT papers, you will see quite a few new question types which you might not have covered during CAT. You can go to the workshops and figure out how to tackle those questions. So that should be of help. Okay. So that is basically what I had from my side.